Hi to everyone that has joined. Welcome to this SNP and Proceed Group webinar, Top 3 Cost Drivers for SAP Data Management. We're hoping that today's presentation will be an insightful session into the world of SAP data and the services and products available within this space to save cost for your organisation. We'll start with some introductions. First, to introduce myself, my name is Ed Williamson and I'm a marketing consultant here at SNP UK and will be today's moderator for this webinar. Our presenters today are Alex Smith, who is the Head of Strategy and Solution at SNP UK, and Robert Rubin, a Director at Proceed Group. Together they have prepared today's session, so I'll pass over to them shortly in order to introduce themselves at this observer and take you through today's presentation. We will have some time for some Q&A at the end, so please feel free to use the questions box throughout, and I will group all questions together for us to answer for you. Alex, I'll pass over to you now to introduce yourself, that's okay. I have control of the screen, so just let me know when you're ready for me to click on.
Thanks, Ed, that's brilliant. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Just a quick introduction about myself. I've spent about 16 years now in the SAP data space. I started my career at Accenture over 16 years ago now. I began my life doing FICO data mappings and cutover for a large oil company. And ever since then, I have been working within the data space. I've gone from working right at the coalface through to CIO advisory and enterprise information management. After Accenture, I joined Baringa Partners, who are an advisory company, and I've been at SNP now for over 5 years, and really believe in the products and the offerings that we can deliver to the market with a real passion. I'll hand over to Robert.
Thanks, Alex, and good afternoon, everybody. Really looking forward to doing this today. Just to introduce myself, so I also have been in the data space for a long time, and started at IBM. And then for about 5 years, I was at SAP, where actually I really got much more into the SAP world, particularly around data and analytics, but also particularly around data in SAP systems, thinking about some of the information lifecycle management products, and obviously HANA. And then for just over a year now, I've been at Proceed, and in fact, I joined Proceed really because I could see the vision that they had, the very strong niche they had around data management, where they seem to be very well established as leaders in this space, and had a very, very good track record. So I'm really pleased to be here. It's obviously been an interesting year, having joined just 3 weeks before lockdown started, so a strange time, but really, really enjoyed it. And part of what I've really enjoyed is the excellent partnerships we've got, and back to being why it's a real pleasure to be doing this webinar with Alex from SNP.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And I think we'll probably both speak on behalf of us both really when we say that data really is the lifeblood of SAP systems, and I think it's particularly prevalent now in the digital era. So I think we'll come on to some of that a bit later on. But as per classic webinar, Ed, if you won't mind going to the next slide, please. Let's just do a little introduction about the company for those that don't know us, as well as some others. So SNP focus on data transformation. We're a data transformation company. Now, that data transformation usually is driven by two areas, either changing business models or business change, or IT-led transformation through new technology. We've spent a lot of time in M&A and carve-outs and divestitures, but we also focus on new technologies. I think where we look at S/4HANA being synonymous with digital and cloud, the offerings we have there are particularly strong, where the software we've developed over the past 25 years addresses this as well as any other scenario. If you could go to the next slide, please, Ed. I'm zipping through this because this is probably the boring part for people. So SAP have been around for 20 plus years now. We're a global company. There are over 1,400 of us. It was founded by the late Dr. Schneider Neureither in 1994. It's centered, or we are, our main office is out of Heidelberg, and we are in the DAX in terms of our listing. We're a gold partner, and we're SAP certified and qualified, and we're part of the Selective Data Transformation Engagement Group, which is that lovely little icon there in the blue box bottom right. I think the main point I wanted to make here was, since our inception, the differentiator has always been software. We've used software to automate and control data migration, data transformations. That was Dr. Schneider-Neureiter's vision. And since that point, we've evolved and developed our portfolio quite widely and broadly into enabling a load of solutions to deliver high value to all sorts of customer challenges around the data space. I'll hand over to Robert to do the proceed introductions.
Thanks, Alex. So we're a Proceed Group, a much smaller organisation, I'll say. We've got just under 100 people, but as I said earlier, we're very specialised and work in the area of SAP data management, so a slightly different field. We've been working in this area just over 20 years. I think it's 21 years now, and that encompasses things like, particularly archiving of SAP systems. And using some of the SAP tools that do that. As that evolved, then areas like retention management were added. GDPR was a big focus several years ago. We helped a lot of customers with GDPR projects. And also over the past several years, the whole area of system decommissioning has come to the fore as the organizations we deal with have more and more challenges with legacy systems. We also have a content management practice. So we've got a team that are very skilled in open text and actually quite a few other content management solutions. And really because there's a really strong crossover between that and the other projects we do, and many of them involve how you handle unstructured data documents in SAP systems. So having the two pieces there really complement each other very well. We've done lots of projects. So we've got a lot of offices that we've opened up in quite a few in recent years. But in fact, obviously in the past year, but even before that, we've been doing everything remotely. So all the work over the last year, and most of what we've done anyway, has been remote delivery. We do like to differentiate ourselves not just on our skills and expertise in these solutions, but also the fact we really understand some of the requirements and the legal, regulatory, audit requirements for SAP data and for business data. So we very much want to make sure we help customers understand what are the different requirements for data, the different retention rules and so on, different countries, different types of data and so on. So we also have good partnership network. We are also an SAP Gold partner. And in the last couple of years in particular, we've done a lot of work with helping customers move both to HANA and S4 and to migrate onto cloud platforms. So enough about us. Let's move on.
Yeah, so I think this slide I really want to focus on the partnership. It was clear through our early conversations, me and Robert being involved in those, that the synergies and complementing offerings that both companies could bring really gave us a differentiator in the market and gave a broad coverage of high value solutions to our clients. I think one of the key points to bring across is that both of our companies utilize either market leading software or our own software to deliver a real difference in the time to value to our clients. And that automation and upfront analysis that we can bring to easily quantify the problem and easily address with automated software and the requirements that are driven from that, it really gives us a unique offering to the market.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear, Alex, because actually we came from a slightly different place where for many years we were focused on our expertise in applying that in consultancy and implementation services engagements. But while we were doing that, initially we developed a set of tools that really were more to help our consultants do the job better. But actually some of them were then changed to be full products, and there's other areas where we just saw enormous opportunity to help customers address some really significant problems, and again develop some products there. So we're now seeing more and more of our businesses becoming based on software, and we really see that reflected in that we can offer clients software packages that address major challenges, and in many cases can do much shorter services engagements because so much of the value is now in the software. So having come from a different place, I think we've ended up with a very actually complementary set of solutions and a similar view of the value of software in some of these challenges.
Yeah, I think one more point to add here, I think we touched on that earlier, Robert, was that, we are SAP focused. Our consultants, your consultants have all, had a long-term and deep understanding of SAP, the repository, the tables, the data, what it means. And that kind of consulting on top of software really gives us the edge, I'd say. Right, so moving on, Ed, if we can, to the next slide. So I think I want to try and bring it back up a minute to the kind of current market conditions. And, when our title has been, 3 cost drivers of data management, I wanted to really contextualize that in regards to S4HANA and digital. I think, it's, as I said earlier, S4HANA is SAP's digital offering. It's the platform and foundation for the future of ERP with SAP. And ultimately, S4HANA is still on people's minds. I think it's fair to say, given the market information available, that the global uptake has been slower than expected. Now, we have had a global pandemic that is still going on and raging in parts of this world, unfortunately. And that hasn't helped things in regards to progression in the field of digital and S4HANA. I was personally aware of multiple projects that, where capital spend was just put on hold the next day, where, these projects were aiming for discovery, strategic visioning of S4 and digital. So we have had that to deal with. The last SAP figures that I can quote were at the beginning of 2021, where the overall uptake of SAP, both S4HANA, both net new and conversion or at present SAP clients was 11%. So I think in terms of the overall adoption rate, it has the global pandemic and this type of figure has pushed and promoted a various set of pivotings or movements in the market to show how one might address the S4HANA journey differently. I think if we look at earlier on in the, let's say, the journey to S4HANA and the options that were on the table for people that were already at SAP, already had SAP as the ERP system of choice, was you either re-implement or you convert your system. Now, neither of which had a particularly compelling benefits case if, for example, you had, within the last 10 years, spent a lot of money transforming to SAP ECC. Now, how are we going to justify doing another transformation and re-implement? Converting the system is spending money to essentially technically upgrade and keeping all of your data, keeping all of the current, let's say, issues or redundancy that you had. Now, I think that the change that we've seen here is that we've got a view from rise of SAP, which turns it on its head a little. Now, I know Robert wanted to probably talk a little bit here about how the experience from Proceed had seen the S4 users and what experiences he's had before we go on. So I'll let Robert come in.
Thanks, Andy. It was just to comment that both in my time at SAP and at Proceed, I think we've seen everything across the spectrum. So now I see the sort of smaller number of clients who are really early adopters of S4, right? The ones that I remember helping them get the initial license back in 2015. They worked on the business case and really saw the value and got the transition done a few years later. But we do see still an awful lot of customers who are firmly wedded to ECC, who really welcomed the extension that SAP announced of support for ECC to 2027, and still don't have very solid plans in place. And these tend to be the ones where they're looking purely at the benefits as in terms of a technical conversion, and that's just not a strong enough case to help them make that move. So that's all. When we started to talk about this webinar, we came back to the conclusion there's really got to be more to it than this.
Yeah, and I think bringing it back to the present day and in 2021, we're coming towards mid-end of May. we've seen the literature, for RISE and SAP, they start to look at, two aspects of the business case, two aspects of consideration when looking, at SAP with RISE, being a new way of procuring single point of contact and a new model for SAP, as a service and potentially on private cloud enterprise. Now, one side of it is optimizing a reliable business foundation to run end-to-end processes as effectively and efficiently as possible. So building the digital core, making sure what you have is right. Now, what is that foundation? Well, that foundation really is looking at how your total cost of ownership is structured, looking at your infrastructure, your IT storage costs, looking at your footprint. Now, what is your footprint? A lot of that is data, especially if you think about cloud. You're thinking about your various tiers of system, your archiving strategies, your decommissioning. How much data you're looking to take across? What is that foundation? How do we build something which can be the foundation for either innovation to be built upon immediately, enabling the creation of value with differentiating business capabilities? But if you're looking at the starting block, for us, it's always been and continues to be building a solid foundation around what you're taking across through data management best practice. Now, if I look at the way the next slide is structured, Ed, please. What I've tried to show here is that through building solid foundations around your data, your information, that becomes a serious part, if not half of the business case. If you're building a triangle of your business case, you're starting to look at innovation at the top, your strategic vision driving where you want to go, the tip of the spear, so to speak. But what data are you bringing with you? What at the bottom are you looking to have as your infrastructure? Where are you deploying your digital landscape? And I think, when we touched upon the reasons for this webinar, the three cost drivers, focusing on storage costs, i.e. that's whether it's production, non-production, various tiers of archiving, reporting, your total cost of ownership of your monolithic or redundant systems or current systems, and the idea of your test or refresh data and your replication of that. These three major drivers kind of start to beg the question: what is the redundancy currently in your landscape? What is the plan for reducing data? Are you taking everything you have to S/4HANA? What do you need in your operational system for that real-time Fiori app-based reporting functionality to drive benefits? Do you need all of your history, or can you actually look at aggregation of certain data within warehousing to allow for that continuation of historic reporting, but really think about what data you want to bring across? I think if you're looking at your decommissioning of your legacy systems, how might you do that? What speed do you need to do that with in order to start to achieve that benefit? That reduction in footprint, I think, is really the sweet spot, Robert, for that aspect of analysis, that right sizing to say, okay, you have this much. What are you taking across? What are you archiving? What is there to decommission? And what's the current state in order to reduce storage costs or look at your total cost of ownership as a benefits case?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this area is where we see that there is tremendous opportunity for value and just not enough consideration going into these whole data management challenges. So often we see customers where there's talk of a data strategy, but what that translates to is very much on the analytics end of the world, BI, putting in data warehousing, BI tools, which of course offers value in itself, but there's a very, very strong set of benefits to be had from looking at the data in your SAP systems and looking at some of these challenges that Alex has laid out. And that's where we think there's an enormous opportunity. And quite often there's a lot more to these than meet the eye. So we talk about archiving as a key driver, and there's some simple, obvious benefits of archiving. You would dramatically reduce the amount of data in your systems, and to try and quantify that, we've done many projects with right sizing and archiving, and 50% reduction is very typical. Often it's 70% or more reduction in data. So when you're looking at infrastructure costs, tremendous savings there. but there are further benefits. So when we think about all the daily operations in your SAP systems, they're often related to the amount of data you're moving around. So if you're looking at things like daily things like backups, like copybacks to other systems in your landscape, indeed just thinking about application performance, thinking about performance of the batch programs that you need to run, any recoveries that need to be done. All of these will benefit from having a smaller core database. And of course, when we talk about SAP archiving, that data is completely accessible still through the same transactions and reports that you're used to. So there's very little downside, but there is a broad set of operational benefits to consider.
I think that's a nice point, because data management is often seen as a fixed cost of the business, but and a direct spend. But if you're looking at this challenge, as a wider context in saying, our S4 journey, what does it look like? When should we start it? Are we moving to cloud? When are we doing that? These spends of thinking about how you might reduce costs, they can be enabling enablers to benefits of the S4 business case, or at least protect or prevent against erosion in regards to going to S4 and finding that actually a lot of the benefits you thought you were going to achieve have been eroded or worn away by the fact that your data wasn't ready. And I think within within SAP SNP, we're doing things around data readiness, housekeeping, or path clearing, where we've seen, let's say, the necessity for that urgent move. With 2025 to S4 being extended, people are still considering it, but they are viewing it as what do we need to do to start getting ready? And this becomes a business case of enablement or path clearing to S4, rather than it just being a fixed cost of the business. And Ed, do you mind just moving to the next slide, please? Okay, so with this slide, I just want to spend a little bit of time describing it, really. What we wanted to try and show here was on the left-hand side, we see some major market scenarios that are being considered strategically at the moment. So if you look at some of the major driving factors to, let's say, the business challenges you see next around cost reduction, increase agility, driving innovation, and creating, say, an overall business case for digital, these scenarios come into play, especially from an IT perspective. Now, what we have been doing and working with Proceed on is looking at what joint offerings we can pull together with our services and software in order to meet those challenges. So we look to use our software to analyze and assess, to begin with, to essentially quantify the challenges and requirements from those business challenges. Let's understand the size of the cost. How much might we reduce? We can do this through an analytical software. We have the right sizing tool. We have the ability to see the extent of savings potentially for decommissioning. Within SNP, we have crystal bridge analysis, which would show you redundancy by age, by domain, by organizational unit. So if there are redundant company codes or plants, how much might we save from that? Looking at the record level, using Proceed's tool, how much data is not used and hasn't been used for a number of years? What is the archiving or what is the information policy around that data? Is it a case of putting it somewhere as an archive backup? Does it need to be there for litigation reasons? Now, all of this software can be combined together in multiple combinations through our offerings to essentially look at, through the lens of either S4 move to cloud or BAU improvements or data management, these key business challenges. I think in the next part of the presentation, we want to just deep dive a little further into the software itself, the offerings, and show you where there are client references and where we've delivered the stuff before. What are the savings? How have we done it, and what has been the success? So next slide, please, Ed.
Okay, thank you, Alex. So let's talk a little bit about one of these solutions, and we'll talk about a few of them in a bit more detail. So Proceed Right Sizer is something we started working on actually more like 5 years ago. And this is a product that's got a highly intelligent core engine that is used to analyze SAP systems. So we can plug this into your SAP systems. It look at the data, the different tables you've got, the sizes of the tables. It understands where you've got any custom data and custom tables. It understands where you've got unstructured data, and we feed in a whole set of rules about retention policies. And out of all of the analysis that it does, you get a very clear view, first of all, of what data you've got, and where anything is, is unusual, is an outlier compared with other organizations that we see. But then it lets you look at, what's the art of the possible. Okay, so if you're going to do an archiving project, how much data could you delete? How much data could you archive? What sort of size system could you reduce to? So that's something really powerful when organizations are looking to pull together a technical plan and a business case for these sorts of projects. And equally, we've seen it used for things like, when we're thinking about maybe a few years ago, it was more about HANA appliances. So if you wanted to get a certain size of a 1 terabyte, for example, HANA appliance, could you fit your systems into that? And now typically we're doing more of that with cloud infrastructure. So we know there's very high costs if you have really big systems on any of the hyperscalers, but if you can reduce to the right size, which might be 4 terabytes as a maximum, then if you can, using these sorts of tools, if you can understand if you can achieve that, then it's going to be a much better costing than having a larger system. So this tool has been very widely used. And just to give an example, we've run this for many customers. And as I said, the benefits that result are often 50% is, I'd say, a comfortable average, but we've seen cases where much larger savings are achieved, 70, 80% or more. And Ed, if you can press the button. So I'll talk about a couple of examples. Croda is a very good customer of ours, where we've done a number of projects, but most recently an archiving project with them, following on from a right sizing engagement. They're a very good case where they had a 3.5 terabyte system nearly, and took it right down to less than half a terabyte. Right, and we were able to do that in less than 3 months. So a really nice example of the sort of benefits. And you can imagine that the costs in terms of the infrastructure were a very strong immediate saving, as they had a strategy to move on to Azure. But equally, all those operational benefits that I was talking about, whenever you're looking at moving half a terabyte around your systems versus 3.5, I think the savings are clear. Okay, and just to talk about another example, we worked with a very large tire manufacturer, and in their case, they had much larger systems. They were 25 terabytes, which we could reduce right down to 2.5. So we took out 90% of the data. Right, that's quite an exceptional example, but that was several $1 million as a US company of hardware savings, and very significant, again, savings in terms of HANA licensing that they needed. So those cases just illustrated very well. But I just also want to point out that we've done work with much smaller organizations. So if your SAP system is a few hundred gigabytes, equally we can get similar sorts of benefits and reductions in those cases as well. So it's we see this as a really clear investment case, and something that again can be addressed early on in our plan to move to S4, and you will reap very significant benefits. Okay, Ed, let's move on to the next one. Okay, and then just to talk about a second tool, this is one we introduced more recently, just over a year ago. This is our tool for system decommissioning. Okay, and when we talk about system decommissioning, this is all about how you address those legacy applications you've got. So some application where you need the data for business reasons or for legal, regulatory, audit reasons, but you're not putting any new data in. So people talk about a read-only system. Okay, and in those cases, you've got different choices, right? If you can choose just to keep that system in place, but there's a lot of costs associated with doing so, in terms of ongoing infrastructure costs, software maintenance costs, staff costs, and so on. So we've got the solutions like this, where you can extract that data. We have reports available, so you can still access the data. We can have retention rules and so on, so you are meeting all the regulatory requirements. But once we've completed the exercise to move the data in here, then you can decommission that old application and not be paying for the infrastructure costs for the software support and so on. So we see very strong savings at 80% TCO reduction for implementing this kind of solution. Again, if you can move on, please, Ed. So we've done these projects with many organizations now, and actually we're seeing a really strong uptake of interest in addressing legacy applications. And one point I'll bring out, I won't talk to all of these, but with the pharmaceutical company, we worked on, again, that was an engagement initially about SAP systems where they'd had a growing estate, through mergers over large numbers of SAP systems. And we were able to decommission a whole set of SAP systems. But when that had gone well, then they asked us to go and do the same for a set of JD Edwards systems. And in fact, there was 55 of those. So it was a very substantial project. And the real positive with this sort of technology is it can handle both SAP and non-SAP applications. And we find that there's a lot of applications across the whole landscape where this can really be applied. So a very strong benefits case. And just to come back to how this fits, again, often when people are moving to S4, they're doing a greenfield or a bluefield migration, and that's going to leave a legacy SAP system behind. Then what do you do with that? Do you just keep it running, or this is an alternative way to address those systems? And equally, when people are moving to the cloud, having a set of legacy applications that may be on really old versions of software, that's often very challenging or very expensive to move to one of the hyperscalers. So again, something like this where you can not take the whole application, just the data, and have that data be highly compressed, but still be able to access what you need is a very positive way to move forward with cloud migrations. Okay, Alex, back to you.
Yes, I think I wanted to spend just a bit of time on one of our most complementary pieces of software that we use together with Proceed, and that's Test Data Organizer, or TDO for short. Now, this is SAP certified. It is focusing on the non-production systems. Now, when we're looking at this, as Robert mentioned, this total cost, this storage cost, looking at SAP S/4HANA, looking at the multi-tier landscape, looking at the requirements for refresh, how much data do you need in your test systems and why? HANA is expensive. There are, as I said, with SAP with RISE, or RISE with SAP, pardon me, you have the option to look at your licenses, look at things in a more clever way. But when you're looking at the data, that doesn't just go away. I think some of the proposals we've been working on recently, Robert and I, have been looking at, in parallel to your strategic thinking around S4, can we begin looking at decommissioning, archiving, understanding the route to getting systems turned off, so that you're not leaving it to the back end of a project. You're actually looking earlier doors to say, are these enabling factors? Can they be put into the budget? Is this something that will enable a quicker speed to value in being able to decommission the system at the point of go live or 4 weeks afterwards, rather than saying, right, now what do we do with the system? Now, what we focus on here is the selective refresh of non-production systems with selective data. So, for example, provisioning 1 year of transactional data rather than the entire system, so you have a representative data set to do everything you require in those, let's say, non-production systems, QA or dev, and reducing substantially the size of those. Now, infrastructure costs, I've mentioned, on HANA can be more expensive, but on top of the reduction in size, this software automates and accelerates the process. So you can refresh non-productive data without the need to run BDLS or reconnect interfaces. And I think one of the other real use cases here, I'd say it's almost like a quick win, it's a bonus, you can get this done quickly, is in regards to utilizing the automated data scrambling or the obfuscation of the sensitive data within these test systems. Now, obviously people that have worked on GDPR or data compliance or regulatory work around data will know that test systems, the access to them, and the idea of having sensitive data replicated is a no-no. Now, this is something that can be done very quickly and automatically. Now, in the tool itself, it includes predefined GDPR scenarios. So that's very useful, very, very useful, because if you can look at and edit the scenarios you need, this is a massive driving factor in enabling a compliance aspect very quickly. And some of the examples, which I'll come on to, where we've done this, GDPR has been, 50%, if not more, of the driving factor when, say, moving to cloud. So when you're moving your BAU landscape to cloud, how do we take that transition and make ourselves GDPR compliant? If you can move to the next slide, please, Ed. You may have to click another button, I'm afraid, if it's animated. Sorry. So what I wanted to try and say here is if you're looking at your current state and you're looking at, let's say, a move to cloud with an upgrade to S4HANA or a transition to S4HANA, there is an ability to look at this and say, right, how do we simplify our platform and get there quicker and ensure that what we have in our new landscape is what we need? It sounds very obvious and it's almost cliched about saying it, but by looking at this and saying, right, let's look at production and pre-pod, what data do we want to reduce? What do we want to take with us? Do we want to do it up front, or do we want to do it as part of the migration? Utilizing right sizer and seller, you start to look at this to say, what are we taking across? What could we have in our systems, and what should we be doing in terms of information lifecycle management? Then, if you look at then the QA or development boxes or the various route or path to productions, pardon me, then what you have is an ability to use TDO to reduce that even further. And it's surprising, quite significant, the amount of saving that can be made in that space. But overall, this is just to show, in combination, in a pictorial sense, moving from left to right, what you see is an overall outcome in the move to cloud, a reduction in your overall storage costs, your virtual server costs, the backups, and overall with your network. So in considering this, take it end to end from a scenario through to business challenge through to actually executing this. This is how you see benefits in a particular use case in using SNP and Proceed together as a partnership. If we can move to the next slide, please. I want to just go through some examples of where we have done work with TDO at clients. So we can see from this, we can't use all the names because of sensitivity factors, but we have a broad reach. This is a very horizontal piece of software which can be applied independent of who you are. You'll see in all of this, it's sensitive data, GDPR data, compliance with information policy is often one of the key drivers for why people look at obfuscation or scrambling of their test data, ensuring that there is a compliance with the master data and sensitive data that exists within your test systems. For Evonik, for example, we were looking at a client requirement to improve the quality of the developer tests. And in doing so, we wanted to make sure that we were in line with the new European data protection regulation. So what we were able to do and achieve was that we provided refreshes with TDO to mask and scramble the sensitive data development. And looking at 600 million records of data sets with that's an actual size of 480 gigabytes were migrated, and 100 million data sets, 120 million data sets were masked. So all of this kind of volume can be done within just the rule set and logic of the software. It's a configurable piece of software, which means that if it is installed, this can be done regularly. You have your procedures and policies represented in logical rule sets. And what you end up with is the capability of ensuring compliance from an audit perspective, reducing and repeating the selection criteria of the data that you need, including editing, and essentially reducing some of the cost savings and size of hosting on the cloud, as well as being legally and compliance from a security standpoint. Now, if you're looking at the three major cost drivers of storage, total cost of ownership, and refresh and movement of data, this can significantly reduce that when looking at it in conjunction with your information policies from production. So I think that's enough from me. If we can move on to the next slide and start to begin to wrap this up to enable questions. I think Robert and I are thinking about how to land this. I think the messaging might sound, let's say, semi-cheesy, but I think the messages begin now. What we were saying in the way we work is that the software enables quantification. In assessing and quantifying, you have a urgency. You have an ability to say, right, how big is the problem? How little is the problem? Might this enable a business case? Could this see a significant reduction, either in operational savings now or enable savings if we are putting this into the transition scenario to move to S4 or to move to cloud? I think that's looking or considering those foundational data considerations, data management drivers, as part of your early commencement or strategy work of your project or program to digital, it is very, very important. I think if you're trying to understand these, I think I'll let Robert speak a little bit more about quantifying or addressing the value. But I think that's where the business case can start and can be changed and influenced compared to what we currently see within the market.
Yeah, that's right, Alex. And actually, if we come back to some of the data strategy work that we're suggesting is of so much value, we've certainly worked with organizations that have done these sorts of projects at any time. Okay, there is value in looking at your legacy systems and looking at your test data, how you can be smarter about it, and so on. There may be drivers for that, like performance issues, or it may just be that actually somebody realizes that there's a lot of cost here that's being spent year in, year out, probably in a budget that no one's really focusing on, that actually you could make a substantial difference. But equally, now as we see both S4 migrations and migrations to the hyperscalers, the value case is even stronger. Right? Given the focus that the cloud gives you on cost per amount of data you've got, it's really driven that kind of focus on what you do with this data. So again, whether you're already on S4 or now in the years coming, you realize you need to start to do something, it's the time to do this evaluation of your data strategy, look at these various aspects before you have to make that move in the next coming years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think from my perspective, if you're, we're doing this in multiple clients at the moment, but the idea of considering data management and your quantification early doors is part of the way we work. That is part of our approach, and that's why it seems so obvious to us. But I do believe that we can't hammer that message home strongly enough. So I'm looking at the time. I think we've been talking nearly for over 45 minutes. So I think it would be nice, Ed, for us to potentially open up the floor to questions, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem at all. So conscious of time, like you said, though, we have had a few questions in from the audience today, so I'll work through them for you now. The first question is around S4. So we heard today about the benefits of a data strategy when considering an S4 HANA move. Does the same apply when evaluating a migration towards the cloud?
Shall I pick this up, Alex?
Yeah, well, why don't you start with that? Yeah, sure.
Okay. I think this is a fundamental thing at the moment, is that when people are looking to move to one of the hyperscalers, okay, quite often the whole cost metric is around the amount of data they've got. That's the fundamental. Of course, there's others as well, but the fundamental is if you're taking 20 terabytes, that's going to be a lot more expensive than if you're taking 5 or even less. So the value in addressing your data and in addressing what you do with legacy systems, and that could be across test and other systems in your landscape as well as production. There's a really strong and clear case for doing that, and really strong. We are talking about 6 to 7 figure reductions per terabyte in the cost that some of our customers have seen on some of the hyperscalers. So I think it is a really strong message actually to think about these sorts of projects and addressing data strategy before a move to the cloud, or if necessary, indeed after it. Alex, is there anything you'd add to that one?
I think you hit the nail on the head with that, Robert.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Robert. No, there's a couple more questions that have come in. The second one is around legacy applications. If we've kept them on a low-cost virtual hardware for now, is there any benefit in your approach in this case with the tool set?
Maybe if I jump in again, Alex.
Yeah.
So this is actually a really interesting conversation, because part of the discussion we have with clients about legacy applications is that there are a variety of ways to handle them. Okay. I mean, you can absolutely choose to keep those applications in place. And we often see as a first step that many clients do move them to virtualized systems. Sometimes they just turn those systems off and only turn them on when required. And that's addressing one part of the equation, which is really just pure part of the infrastructure cost, moving from older physical infrastructure and potentially moving off on-premise systems. But in those cases, you're still running those applications. You're still paying all the support costs, not just for the application, but for databases, operating systems, and everything else. You're still having staff that needs to understand those applications. But the other side of the coin that we often see as more of an issue with this is that often these are quite old applications. Okay, they're starting to become out of support. They are starting to not get any security updates. So quite often we find organizations that are putting them on virtual infrastructure and turning them off because they're actually quite worried about turning them on. Okay, and if you're keeping those legacy applications because you know you're going to need data at some point, right? Come the day when you turn it on and it doesn't come back for some reason, is when you've got a problem. Okay, so both for cost reasons, and business risk reasons, we'd say that yes, moving to virtual infrastructure is a fine first step, but actually it's worth looking at where you can go from there and really drive significant further savings and take out some of those business risks that are quite big concerns. We've seen organizations that were being externally audited, couldn't access the data they needed, and we've had to go and help them and dig them out of a hole very, very quickly. So yeah, definitely worth looking at some of these projects and seeing how they can help you. But thanks, Ed. Any others?
Yeah, one last one here is around the topic of data quality. So appreciate today was touched on around decommissioning, archiving and test data, but is data quality itself something covered by these products?
Alex, should I talk to that or shall I?
Yeah, sorry, no, pardon me. I was on mute saying, should I take this one? I'll take this one. I think, yeah, there are multiple ways to look at the data quality or completeness or integrity. There's lots of ways to look at data's quality as an overhaul. So if you're looking at what data is redundant in your system, that's the first step of data quality. It's the obsolescence. It's what is redundant and what shouldn't I have there. But then you have your questions around completeness of data, which is important. Now, if you're looking at some of the analogies you could use to say, right, what's the extent of dead wood that I need to cut off with an axe? What should I then take a knife to versus a scalpel? That's kind of how data quality works. Now, in our combination of software, we have data quality software itself. And that allows you to start to say, well, if I'm looking at particular data sets, is there any data missing for the S/4HANA data model mandatory requirements? And then are there duplicates, which is the next step? Are there, incorrect data records, duplicate data records? And then if you're looking further on down the line, are there things that might screw up particular functionality in S4 or give us spurious results when it comes to our real-time reporting? So it's a journey, data quality or data integrity. But the point is, if you start with the big hitting questions, and then say, of the data that is in scope that we want to take across, you then point the data quality software, which we can offer as a partnership, to those records that are in scope to say how many are complete against rules. what is the integrity of this? What are the duplicates? And then you start to address various other data quality issues as they come up. But we work with clients on this as a holistic package. This is always in context of a wider piece of work with a set of pain points, issues, requirements that need addressing. But in short, yes, we have data quality. It's about applying it at the right point in time against the requirements of the client.
Great, thank you, Alex. To wrap up, thank you both for that very detailed and insightful session. That's all the questions from the audience. As touched on earlier, hopefully you can see the contact details on the screen now. So please don't hesitate to get in touch after this session to discuss further the tool sets of both SNP and Proceed, and how this hopefully could be a benefit to your business should you be planning SAP transformation and in more general cost management. Myself and Michelle will be sending out a recording of this webinar to all attendees, as well as the slides. So thank you once again for taking the time to join us this afternoon. It's very much appreciated from all of us. And Alex and Robert, if you'd like to say any closing notes, I think we can wrap up for today.
Yes, thank you for listening to us. I hope you found that useful. And yeah, I look forward to hearing if there are any questions, queries, or requests for us to come have a chat.
Yeah, indeed, it's been a pleasure. So I hope everyone's found it of some value, and be delighted if anybody wants to follow up with us, just to understand your challenges, see if we can help, and take it forward from there. Okay, so I think thanks again, everybody, and we're going to close it now. Okay, goodbye from me.
Goodbye all, thank you.